New Mexico Territory, 1886, Pecos Crossing. A barefoot child stops a rancher. Can you take her instead of me? And Jed Hollis says, both. That word drags Doyle's paper, a snipped wire, and Barranca's smoke to his porch. Not talk, but work. Willow bark, an open door, a whistle at daybreak. Stay and hear a house learn to breathe. Pecos Crossing baked like a clay skillet. Noon put a hard shine on the pens, on the hogs and longhorns, on the boards rubbed gray by years of boots. Dust floated so fine it found a man's tongue and stayed there. Jed Hollis let it sit. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. He kept his hat brim low and his errand small. Liniment for a sore leg gelding, a sack of salt if the price wasn't foolish. He was easing past the far edge where the shade went thin and the talking went mean when a little hand caught his coat. It wasn't much of a tug, just enough to stop a man who didn't stop for much. A girl stood there, barefoot on splinters of sun, hair stuck to her brow, brown eyes too wide for that small face. "Can you take her instead of me?" she said. Not loud, not begging either, just a thing said because it had to be said. Jed looked where the child pointed. A woman slumped against a post, wrists scabbed raw where rope had rubbed, lips split, heat burning under her skin. You didn't need the whole story to know it. The penman sat on a crate with a tally stick and a face that said he'd seen storms pass and never got wet. On the barrel beside him, someone had scratched MB with a nail. Jed's mouth stayed shut. He put his gloved hand inside his coat, brought out a worn poke and dropped it on the plank table. Coins hit the wood with a dull workman sound. "Both," he said. The penman rolled a shoulder. "Barranca'll want his money back." He said it like remarking on weather. His eyes cut to the MB mark and back to Jed. "You know how he is." "Don't," Jed said. He wasn't asking. The man sniffed, leather creaked, pens groaned. Somewhere a hog screeched and then remembered the heat and shut up. The girl didn't want to move. The woman, Elena, somebody would say later, breathed shallow, like the air hurt going in. Jed slid the poke closer with 2 fingers. He had hands made for fence wire and cinch knots. They'd buried a child once. They could carry another if they had to. He went to the rope and cut it clean, not jerking, not making a show. The fibers fell like tinder. He lifted the woman as if she were all bone and not much else, and felt the heat coming off her, fever riding hard. "Name?" he asked the girl. "Anita." She held her chin like a soldier and a child at once. "All right, Anita." He set her in front of the saddle, small legs clamping leather by pure will. He settled Elena behind, tied a steadying strip of blanket across without binding, just a cradle to keep her there. The gelding flicked an ear, patient as an old mule when it counted. From behind, a spit hit dirt. "Barranca, don't forget," somebody said, low and pleased with himself. Jed didn't turn. He put his boot in the stirrup and found the seat like he'd never left it. The sun laid a white blade across the brim of his hat. He felt the girl's fingers gather the fabric of his shirt between her fists, felt the tremor run through them and into him. He let the horse start slow through the lanes of boards and eyes and heat. They passed a crate with the MB scar and a man resting his heel on it like a promise. The telegraph pole beyond the pens carried a faint hum, wire tight in the noon wind, a sound like a throat cleared and thinking better of speaking. Jed's gaze touched it and moved on. He had meant to buy liniment. He had meant to say nothing to nobody and be home before the stove cooled. But a small hand had pulled his coat, and some things a man does not step around. At the edge of the market, he turned the gelding toward the cottonwoods. Hooves found the hard ground outside the churned dust. Behind them, talk rose and fell, and the heat went on hammering the world. "Thank you," Anita said into his shirt, so soft he felt it more than heard it. Jed gave the reins a little lift. Hang on, he told her. A hawk wrote a slow line across the sky. Far back where the shade went thin, a man sat on a crate and watched them go, a black cigar butt stuck to his lip like a bad idea that wouldn't leave. He tapped Ash, then the crate right over MB. Pecos Crossing kept its noise. Jed kept his course. The road to Dry Cedar waited, long and empty, with room enough for whatever was coming to catch up. They took the river road where the dust lays in layers. The gelding moved like it knew the heat and didn't argue with it. Anita's hands hooked Jed's shirt at the spine and settled there, small as sparrow feet. Elena rode behind, tied in by a strip of blanket that wasn't a rope, fever breathing through the wool. The country opened, then closed again. Mesquite alkali flats, awash gone white with salt. A hawk rode the air and didn't flap once. The telegraph wire ran off to the horizon, singing that hoarse tune the wind pulls when it has nothing else to say. Jed let the sound sit in his ear. He'd listened to wire a long time. Storm-coming wire, empty town wire, payday wire. This one sounded cautious. They topped a slope where the red dirt holds tracks. Fresh hoof scuffs crossed the trail and angled down toward the flats. Beside them lay a cigar butt wet enough to stain the dust. Pecos men chewed or rolled with corn paper. The store-bought leaf was for folks who liked to show they could. Barranca's boys liked to show. Jed swung down. He put 2 fingers to the butt, felt the damp, smelled the sweet, bad tobacco. He set it back exactly where it had been. Anita watched him over the horn, eyes round but steady. Easy, he told the horse, and meant the child, too. He took the reins and led off the ridge, not hurrying, not slow. By the time cottonwoods showed, the light was slid toward afternoon, and the heat went from hammer to anvil. Still hard, just quieter about it. Dry Cedar stood where it always had. Boards silvered, porch skirt kicked in at one corner, pump handle leaning like a tired man. Jed felt something rise in him, and press back down, the way a cough will when you're trying to be polite. He lifted Anita to the ground. "Swing your leg," he said. She did, careful as a cat. He eased Elena's weight to his arms and carried her across the porch. The hinge announced him in a voice that hadn't been used in a while. Inside smelled of old wood, soap long gone, and a little leather that refuses to leave. He shouldered the bedroom door with his hip and set Elena on a narrow bed where the quilt had waited without complaint. The room was small and blue in a tired way. On the sill, glass showed the cottonwoods like a memory with fingerprints. He pulled the quilt up smooth, no fuss, no tucking too tight, and set a tin cup near the pillow with water so clean you could see the bottom. Anita came to the threshold and stopped herself like she'd run into a rule. Jed touched the jamb with one knuckle. "Door stays yours," he said, voice low as a boot scrape. He backed out, letting the light find the pillow. Chores started on their own. He walked the pump, worked the handle till it caught, filled the kettle. He set it on the iron plate and fed kindling with the care a man saves for skittish colts. The match flared and made that straw sound matches make when they're honest about their job. Flame took, then argued, then settled. He felt the house notice. Outside, the wire on the pole thrummed once, then felt around for its note. A far crow complained. The gelding drank from the trough and blew bubbles like a bored boy. Jed checked at the cinch for the habit of it, and found his hands moving the way they had when there were more voices under this roof. He set a chair to the bedroom door and sat where a man sits who doesn't plan on sleeping much. Through the crack, he could see a piece of quilt, the side of Elena's face. Anita curled like a question mark at her mother's shoulder. Steam began to whisper from the kettle, not a boil yet, just promise. The stove caught fully then, a deeper sound, the iron taking heat into itself. In the old boards, a knot popped and gave up a smell of sap. Jed watched that slice of doorway and thought how buildings learn a person, and how some forget when there's no one to teach them. He waited with his hat in his hands, listening to the wire, the kettle, his own breath. Can a house remember how to breathe? He didn't go looking for the answer. He meant to sit right where he was and see if it found him. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Steam lifted in slow ropes. The kettle found its voice and kept it. Jed took down a small tin from the back of a shelf, pried the lid with his thumbnail, and shook out curls of willow bark the color of old saddle skirts. He crushed them in a wooden bowl with the butt of a spoon and a dab of molasses till the room smelled faintly sweet over the iron and dust. Work first, talk never. That was a rule that had lasted. He set a pan on the stove, dipped from the kettle, and let the bark steep till the water went tea-brown. A clean rag weighted over his forearm like a habit. He pulled another chair to the bedroom door and knocked once with his knuckles, a sound small as a pebble in a bucket. No answer, just the hush of sleep and fever. "Coming in," he said, mostly to the air. Elena lay turned to the window, skin sheened, breathing shallow and regular now, not that ragged saw-cut from the road. Rope had written its story around her wrists. He didn't read it out loud. He set the pan on the washstand, wrung the rag till it quit dripping, and set to, one careful pass at a time. The room took the sound of cloth over skin and kept it. Anita stood at the jamb with her toes right on the crack. Like that was as far as she dared go. Jed nodded her closer. "You can help," he said. "I mean, just slow." She came a half step, then another, hands ready and scared. He showed her how to twist the rag, how to keep the water from running back into the sores, how to lay the cool where the heat was worst. Her hands shook at first, then less. "Like that," he said. "That'll do." Elena's lashes trembled, then stilled. A line eased from her mouth that had been there a while. Jed changed to a clean strip, tied it off neat, not tight. He set a dab of the bark tea by her lip with a spoon, tipped just enough for a swallow. "Sip slow," he told her, though she was halfway under. Back in the kitchen, he poured the rest of the willow into a crock and marked it with a scrap of string so he'd remember in the night. He rinsed the bowl, wiped the table with a flat palm, set 2 tin cups by the stove, one small, one big, like setting tools out for a morning fence. Things in their place so a man's head can go quiet. Before dusk, he took his blanket and rolled it once, then spread it on the floorboards outside the door, edge squared to the jamb. He set his hat crown down beside it, boots off, socks to steam by the stove a minute, and then back on. He knew cold could slide under a door even in August, if you let it. He put his back to the wood and felt the room through it, the tiny shift of a sleeper, the small wet breath of a child. He let his eyes shut, but not all the way. Wind came up thin. The wire out by the cottonwoods drew a long moan, the way a bow draws a fiddle, leaned into it, held, and let go. Jed's brow moved a hair. He had heard boys in town lay a hand to a line to make it sing. He had heard coyotes pull it with their brush by accident or joke. This wasn't that. This was a testing kind of sound. He filed it the way you set a nail part way in against tomorrow. The stove settled deeper, iron taking on the work without complaint. Anita's feet padded soft to the threshold. She looked down at him with the solemn face children keep for night. "You sleep," he said. She nodded like he'd given permission to breathe. The floor took her small weight back to the bed. Jed tipped his head to the door again, so a shoulder was there if someone tried it. "Door stays yours," he said, quiet as a hinge deciding. Outside, the gelding blew and stamped once. Farther out, a crow threw 3 dry calls and quit. Jed watched the shadows collect in the corners and didn't ask them for anything. The house listened with him. Between the breathing of 3 people and the wire's uneasy note, the place began, inch by inch, to remember its old job. All right, he told nobody, and let the night take a little of him, but not enough. Dawn came on like it was thinking about it. Light slid under the door and made a thin blade across the floorboards, pale as skim milk. Jed had slept in pieces, shoulder to the jamb, hat over his eyes, counting the breaths on the other side of the wood without meaning to. A sound broke it, the scrape of a bed leg, a sharp breath pulled wrong. He was up on one knee when the door came a hand's width, and Elena was there, eyes wide, and not here yet. Her hand found what it could reach, a wooden brush from the washstand, and swung. The brush caught him on the meat of the shoulder. Thud, then another, not enough to break anything, enough to wake old ghosts. Jed's hands came up, open. He didn't grab. He didn't stop her. He stood and gave ground, 2 slow steps back into the hall where the boards were cooler. "No," he said, one word level as a fence post set right. She came a half step after him, chest heaving, hair wild from the pillow, the brush shaking more from old fear than new anger. The door hung crooked between them. Anita woke with the kind of sound a bird makes when it knows better than to call for help. She slid off the bed and put both feet on the floor like a promise. "Ma," Anita whispered, small and steady, "he sleeps by the door." Elena's arm dropped a little. The brush sagged until the bristles touched her skirt and left a dusty brown arc. Anita reached out, not to Jed, not to the brush, but to the folded blanket on the threshold. She set her hand on the square-cornered wool, patted it with a child's grave certainty, then lifted her mother's fingers and laid them there. Elena's fingertips stayed on the edge of the blanket. A long breath went out of her without asking. She looked at Jed for the first time like he was a man in a hallway, and not a shape in a bad dream. His hat was off. His shoulder would carry a bruise the size of a biscuit come noon. He waited the way men wait on colts. They don't blink too fast, and they keep their boots where the animal can see them. "Door stays yours," he said again, softer than the hinge. He backed one more step, then turned his body sideways so the space could breathe. The house listened. The stove sighed. A cottonwood leaf ticked the window. The brush loosened in Elena's hand. She set it down on the washstand like it might bite if she wasn't careful. Her face found the window and held there, pupils shrinking on the light, taking measure of the room. The quilt, the sill. She swallowed a small dry sound. Anita slid past, climbed onto the bed, and tugged the quilt over her mother's knees with the seriousness of a nurse. She kept a shoulder against Elena as if to anchor her to this side of morning. Jed stayed where he was until he felt the pull on the wire out back, the wind testing it or something else. It thrummed once and let go. He eased down the hall and out to the porch long enough to let his own breath find a pace. The pump handle leaned like an old friend who'd seen all this and more. He rolled his shoulder once and decided not to think about it. When he came back to the doorway, he didn't cross it. He just set a tin cup on the floor, water beaded and cold, and nudged it in with 2 fingers. Elena's eyes tracked to the sill again. A smear on the outside board, mud dried to a pale crust, showed the print of a spur rowel, a little iron star pressed and lifted. The kind men wore when they wanted folks to hear them coming, the kind Doyle liked for show. Her gaze held there, then moved to Jed and back to the mark. She didn't speak. Her hand, still resting on the blanket at the threshold, pressed down once, as if checking whether the floor under it was real. "Eat a bite when you can," Jed said, to the room, to the morning. He tipped his hat and stepped away, leaving the door to swing as far as Elena let it. Behind him, the stove settled into its work. In the yard, a crow hammered 3 notes and shut up. On the sill, the star of dried mud waited where a boot had bragged in the night. Afternoon softened. Heat stepped back a pace and let the house have a say. Jed set beans to simmer, and shaved a curl of salt pork into the pots till the broth went the right color, river brown with a shine to it. He ladled careful, not slopping, into a crock bowl and set a spoon across the rim so it wouldn't rattle. At the bedroom he knocked once with the side of his knuckle and eased the door a thumb's width. Elena watched from the pillow, eyes clearer, hair swept back by a child's hand. Jed slid the bowl onto the washstand. "Soup," he said, and that was the whole of it. He set a heel of bread and a pinch of salt beside it, then stepped back till his boot was out of the room. Elena looked past the steam to the wall shelf, where a small frame sat, a photo gone soft at the edges. Gap-toothed girl, lamb in her lap, hair wild from running. On the floor under the bed, the toes of two scuffed shoes turned out like they'd been kicked off in a hurry a long while ago and were still waiting to be claimed. Elena's breathing changed. Not louder, just longer. A stone set down inside where no one could hear it land. Anita climbed up and dipped the spoon. She blew like she'd seen women do and held it to her mother. Elena tasted slow. The salt pork spoke first, then beans, then the small pride of a stove that had remembered its work. She nodded once as if to a neighbor. Jed left them to it. In the kitchen he washed a plate that didn't need washing and set it to dry anyway. The stove clicked and settled. A thin curtain over the sink lifted and fell like a chest, sleeping. He found himself looking at the doorway more than the dish. When he caught it, he put the plate down and went outside to see about the pump he'd already seen about twice. Near sundown, the cottonwoods cut the light into strips. Jed brought a little more broth, not enough to crowd a belly, and he didn't step past the jam. Elena reached for it, fingers nicked but steady. Her gaze slid to his shoulder where the brush had kissed skin. He felt the look and took it like a man takes weather. Can't do anything about it. Might as well wear it. Night came on sure. Jed rolled his blanket and set it square at the threshold again. Before he lay down, he leaned in just enough to pull the quilt over Anita's small shoulder. Elena's hand got there first. They both paused, his hand a breath above hers, her hand warm from soup, and nothing touched but the same idea. He backed out, hat tipped low. The door stayed open, the width of a palm. No latch fell. He didn't say a word about it, and neither did the house. The dark was kind for a while. Stove iron took heat and gave it back in little clicks. Somewhere a knot in a beam let go and sent up the faintest smell of sap. The wire outside tried on its tune and couldn't quite find it, dragging like a tired fiddler. Jed turned his head toward it without moving anything else. Just before first gray, hoof gravel sounded light on the road. Not stopping, just saying a man had ridden past with some place to be. The wire sagged its note, then came up too quick. Jed stood and went to the porch. Miss Pritchard was walking fast down the lane in her work skirt, bonnet caught under one elbow, a coil of fix line over her shoulder. "Mornin', Mr. Hollis," she called, breath fogging in the cool that sneaks before sun. Wires lagging. Somebody took a hand to it in the night. Jed looked past her to the pole, to the porcelain that kept a shine, even in low light. "I figured," he said. "Reckon you did," she answered, not asking why. She nodded toward the house. "You mind if I climb your fence to get a reach? Help yourself." She touched the brim of nothing and went on, skirts whispering. Jed watched till the shape of her was more wire than woman against the sky. Behind him, in the blue room, a door breathed open and stayed. Inside, a child's slow snore hitched and smoothed. The day would come on no matter who had plans for it. He went back to his place on the floor, back to the wood that told him when people slept and when they didn't. When he settled, the blanket under his shoulder felt like it had learned the weight of him. The house kept breathing, so did he. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. By mid-morning, the lane filled with the sounds a small place makes when it tries not to worry. Hank Devereaux's anvil talked in short sentences. Miss Pritchard had her skirts hitched and a wrench on the pole. Porcelain insulator laid in her palm like an egg with a hairline crack. Jed held the ladder and watched her swap it clean. The wire took the new piece and hummed a steadier note. "You'll get messages again," she said, climbing down, "lest somebody cuts them twice." "Much obliged," Jed said. The anvil went quiet, then Hank himself came around the cottonwoods, wiping his hands on a black rag, shoulders set, the way men set them when iron's cooling right behind them. "Jed," he said, not unfriendly, not warm, just the way a name sounds when it stands in the road with you. "You fetch trouble to your stoop?" Before Jed could answer, hooves troubled the dust in an organized way. Two riders came straight as a surveyor's line, Rafe Doyle in a long duster that thought more of itself than a coat should, Quinn behind with his hat brim shaved cruel, and a mouth working a toothpick. Both wore rowels that would print stars in mud. They didn't ask the gait, they let it find its own swing. Doyle slid off, smoothed a paper against his thigh, and showed the writing before he showed his face. "Indenture," he said, like it was a blessing. "Signed to Miguel Barranca. We're collecting what's his." The paper was cheap and felt it, wrinkled, ink gone soft along the lines like it had sweated. Jed didn't take it. He looked at the names and then at Doyle's hands. The man's nails were clean in a way hands get clean when they don't do things that stain. Nettie came up the lane with a small sack of coffee under her arm, having the bad luck to arrive into it. She kept her eyes on the ground like a woman studying weeds. "Town don't take kindly to Barranca calling," she said to nobody, or to the air between men. Reverend Eli showed himself from the shade of Jed's porch, hand resting on his Bible as if it had weight and knew how to use it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, not yet. Quinn let his heel kiss a fence picket. Wood complained. He smiled at the sound. Doyle held the paper nearer, chin out. "You can be neighborly, Hollis. Hand the woman over, we go quiet. Man keeps his place, the world keeps turning." Jed felt the room behind him without turning, Elena's slow breaths, a child's weight changing on a mattress. He set his hand on the top rail, the same way he'd set a hand on a gelding that thought about shying. "I'll see to it," he said, the words dry as unbuttered bread. Hank snorted a laugh that wasn't joy. "See to it," he says. He kept his eyes on Doyle. "Paper smells wet, iron smells honest. That's all I got." Doyle's mouth thinned. "Paper's the law." He let the edge of it tick Jed's shirt. "Barranca wants what he paid for. Man's entitled to his property." Nettie's jaw worked, then set. "People ain't property," she said, not loud, like telling a stubborn jar it was going to open. Reverend Eli shifted his weight. "Best day for everyone is the day no man puts a hand to what ain't his," he said, and let silence do the rest of the sermon. Quinn's spur clicked. He rocked back on his heels and let the toothpick trade corners of his mouth. "We can do it tidy or we can do it noisy," he told the fence. Jed looked at Doyle, at the rowels, at the paper, at the dust on Quinn's boots that didn't belong to any road he respected. He measured each thing as if he might have to lift it. "You boys come early," he said. "We come again earlier," Doyle said, meaning daybreak. "Arroyo Ford, you put her on a mule and send her across. You keep your child pet. If you got the notion, you get peace. Them's good terms." Nettie's sack of coffee creaked under her arm. Hank looked at Jed from under his brow like a man checking a weld he isn't fond of. Miss Pritchard pushed her cracked insulator into Doyle's chest, without meaning to, and then thought better and put it in her apron. Reverend Eli's thumb tapped the Bible's spine once. Jed didn't nod and didn't shake. He let the words hang where the wire would catch them. "I heard you," he said. Doyle folded the paper like it could be folded into something sharper. He swung up lazy, reins in 2 fingers. "Daybreak," he repeated, turning his horse with a knee. Quinn paused close to the fence and drove his spur into the post just enough to splinter a top edge. The little star he wore left its story in the wood. They took the lane slow, letting hooves write dust on dry cedar's porch. When they were far enough for men to speak again, Hank let air out. "Reckon that was polite," he said. "It didn't sound like praise." Jed looked at the splintered picket, then at the house. Inside, a spoon touched crockery and stopped. The wire on the pole tried a note and found it, steady for now. "Daybreak at the Arroyo," Nettie said, as if writing it in a ledger. "A poor man's schedule." "Poor man's got to keep it," Jed said. He set his palm on the fence where Quinn's star had bit. The wood was warm, and it held the mark like a map of what was coming. The wind took a run at the line and made it speak low and even, like it remembered how. Evening took the edge off the day, but left the work. Miss Pritchard came back with a coil of fix line over her shoulder and the cracked insulator wrapped in a handkerchief. "Found another sag south of you," she said, nodding toward the wash. "Close to the arroyo where men like to step off the road." Jed walked with her along the fence till the cottonwoods gave out and the land went to brush and white gravel. She lanterned the pole and raised the light slow. Copper showed bright where it shouldn't. Clean nipper bites on both sides, a span missing like a tooth knocked neat from a smile. Down at the base, in damp dust, a small iron star had pressed and lifted, a rowel mark with one bent point, the kind they'd seen in mud at the sill. "Somebody don't want calls going out before sunup," she said. "Somebody aims for the ford," Jed answered. She unrolled new wire. He braced the ladder, boots set, hands steady. They worked without chatter. When the join was tied and the porcelain swapped for a whole piece, she set the cracked one in his palm. "Keep that," she said. "Law likes something it can hold." Back in the yard, Hank crouched at the corner post with a wrench and a length of flat iron. He had cut a pocket into the hollow rail earlier in the year for a different kind of coyote. Now he eased in a short lever, greased where it needed to slide, and tested it. One dry tack and the section lifted a breath, enough to drop a weight if a man pulled it proper. He wiped his hands. "Push here," he told Jed, "and your surprise falls where you point it. Ain't art, it'll do." He fished in his apron and brought up a small iron whistle, black as a crow's tongue, forged from scrap. He pressed it in Juanita's palm. "If things go crooked, you blow till your cheeks hurt. Sound carries better than men." Anita looked to Jed. He closed her fingers over it. "Keep it close," he said. The yard picked up the smell of lamp oil when Jed lit another lantern for the porch. A dog 3 farms off threw 2 thin howls and went quiet. The wire, newly mended, tried a note and found it, truer now. Stars came on, one, then a handful, then the whole scatter. Inside, Elena sat on the bed with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She had a basin ready and a strip of cloth clean enough to pass a mother's test. "Sit," she told Jed, and he did, at the table where a man signs a deed and eats his supper. She poured a trick of whiskey on the cut where Doyle's brush or the morning's trouble had scored him earlier, then took needle and thread like a woman who had seen boys come home in pieces and sent them back out whole as she could manage. Her hand shook once, then steadied. The stitches were even and tight, not fancy, just right. Jed watched her work and let the rope of his breath go slow. When she nodded off, she pressed a square of cloth into place and tied it quick. "Much obliged," he said. She didn't answer with words. She set the basin aside, laid the needle near the lamp, and rested her palm on the table for a second, like leaving a weight there where he could find it again. Anita sat on the bench with her fist around the whistle, testing the feel of it without making a sound. They ate what there was, beans and the end of the bread, without the clatter folks make when they want to hear themselves. After Jed checked the cinch he'd already checked, and made sure the old shotgun would come to hand if it had to. Hank tapped the lever once more and nodded to himself. Daybreak, Jed said to the room. 2. The wood to the wire. The word took its place and didn't ask for more. They turned down lamps till the house held only what light it needed. Reverend Eli's Bible lay on the porch rail where he'd left it with a ribbon, showing a page men like to read when trouble thinks it's tall. Nettie's sack of coffee sat on the counter like a promise for after. Jed rolled his blanket to the threshold again. Door stays yours, he said, because some things need saying twice in a house that's learning. Elena drew the quilt over Anita and let her hand rest there a moment longer than the chore required. The child slid the whistle into the small pocket sewn at the hem of her dress and patted it once. Wind came down off the mesa and moved through the cottonwoods so soft you had to stop to hear it. Out beyond the last fence line, on the ridge where rock shows bone white, a cigar coal blinked, went dark, blinked again, patient like a man with time. Daybreak put a pale edge on the world and left the rest to decide itself. The arroyo lay quiet, a crooked scar of sand with a trickle of water talking to stones. Cottonwoods held their breath. Jed came in from the north bank, horse-walking, hat low, the air cold enough to make a man's teeth think. Nita rode up front like before, small and set. Elena kept pace on foot the last yards, not far, not behind. They were there already, Rafe Doyle loose in the saddle, coat showing off, Quinn to his right, eyes chewing on everything. A third rider waited back in the salt bush, the kind of distance a careful man favors. Cigar smoke wrote short lines in the air and broke apart. Doyle swung down like a fellow arriving to a table laid for him. He held paper to the light. Indenture, he said. The word wanted to be bigger than it was. Sign to Miguel Barranca. We're done talking. Jed didn't touch the paper. He palmed a small flour sack instead and set it on a flat rock. He opened it with 2 fingers. Inside lay the cracked porcelain insulator and 2 short pieces of fresh snipped copper, bright as lies. Wire was cut on my line, he said. Law won't back thieves of wire. Doyle's look twitched, then learned to sit still again. Quinn's hand found the horn and gripped it softer than a man looks mean. Wind came by and offered the telegraph a lone note from the ridge. Steady now, not the dragged kind. Jed heard it and let himself know he'd heard it. He stepped 1 pace sideways, a man easing weight from a tired knee. His heel brushed the cedar post Hank had worked last night. Inside the hollow rail, old iron waited, the way a trained dog waits. Still, then ready. Doyle lifted his chin. Hand the woman over. He kept his voice smooth for the horses. You keep the little one if you're after charity. I ain't your preacher. Jed breathed once. The horse under Anita took it from him and breathed too. Ain't endin' anyone, he said. The air went thinner. Quinn's shoulder dipped. Somewhere behind Saltbush a mount shifted and set stones ticking down the bank. Jed's thumb found the hidden lever where Hank said it would be. He pulled like a man, meaning to open a stubborn gate. The post coughed a sound, wood over iron, and the shotgun he'd stowed slid down the rail, butt heavy, barrels kissing his palm as if they'd agreed on it days ago. He brought it up, not fast, not slow, and fired into the dirt between Doyle's boots. Gravel jumped like it had good sense. Quinn's horse checked hard and blew through its nose, wanting home. Doyle's pistol showed quick and mean, a flash of nickel that hadn't done much work yet. He snapped a shot before his brain reached his hands. The round shaved Jed's sleeve and bit a line of heat into his upper arm. Anita's breath punched out against Jed's ribs and stayed there, a heartbeat you could feel like a fist. He didn't fire back. He broke the shotgun, thumbed another shell, closed it with a sound that told its own story. and held it a foot low, right where a man looks if he wants to keep folks honest without making widows. "Don't," he said, tired more than angry. The world balanced on small things then. Anita's fist yanked the iron whistle from her pocket, and she blew till the day sharpened. The note cut the arroyo lengthwise. Elena stepped into it, hand up, caught Doyle's reins hard by the cheekpiece. She didn't look at him. She looked at her child. That was the whole point. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. From the rock lip to the west, Deputy Tom Avery came down like a man who'd counted to 10 and liked 11 better. His boots found dirt, and his hands found Doyle's wrist, and then the iron found Quinn's clean, practiced, no show. 2 short grunts, 1 command you didn't need to hear twice, and the hardware did what hardware does. Out past the cotton scrub, the third rider wheeled and went, barranca, by the set of the shoulders, by the look back he didn't take. Hoofbeats broke into the flats, softened, and stretched away like a promise that would need keeping. Silence worked at the edges. Water kept talking to stone. Jed lowered the barrels to the ground and let the breath he'd been keeping go where it wanted. Elena's palm, still on the rein, opened and dropped. She looked at Jed's cut, at the damp line the bullet had drawn under his sleeve, and something in her face lifted and set down changed. Tom straightened, a boot on Doyle's spur to quiet the little star. He shot a look to the ridge where the wire ran and then to the flour sack on the rock. "Got your proof," he said, short. He took a folded telegraph slip from his coat, its edge creased twice. "Word off the line, Miss Pritchard fixed. Marshal's on Barranca, South Run. Says hold these 2. He'll meet us in town." Jed nodded once. Anita's whistle sagged on its string and tapped her collarbone. He reached and found her shoulder with the hand that didn't hurt. The arroyo took on the sound of morning again, the small, regular noises of a place that had decided to keep going. Elena stood where she was, a beat longer, and in her eyes there was the same thing as the steady wire, pulled tight, then sure. They came back slow, letting the morning settle behind them. Deputy Avery took Doyle and Quinn up the road with a rope and a look that said the rest could wait on a desk. Jed walked the gelding the last stretch, holding Anita against him where the whistle knocked her collarbone with each step. Elena kept a hand to the blanket strap till the porch took them in. The house listened as they crossed it. Jed set the old shotgun in the corner where it could think about what it had done, then sat at the table, because that's where a man sits when he needs steadiness. The cut on his arm had bled a little through the makeshift wrap. He unbuttoned the sleeve to where cloth stuck. Elena brought the basin like it had always lived under her hands. Whiskey burned the room in a clean way. She didn't ask if he was ready. She lifted the edge of the bandage and watched for a hitch in his breath. When it didn't come, she threaded the needle and set in shallow stitches, even, close, not proud. Her hair fell once, she blew it back without thinking. Jed kept his eyes on a knot in the tabletop and named his breaths like fence posts, one after another. Salt sweat ticked down his temple and found the corner of his mouth. He tasted the morning's grit and let it be. Elena tied off and smoothed the cloth with her thumb like you flatten a wrinkle out of a child's shirt. "Much obliged," he said. She rinsed the needle, set it by the lamp, and left her hand on the wood, long enough for the table to memorize it. "My brother," she said quiet, "in Sonora. Fought boys twice his size. I learned on him." A small twist at the corner of her mouth that wasn't a smile, not entirely. Jed watched the knot in the wood, a breath longer. "I buried a girl," he said. "She liked lambs." The words went down into the board and stayed there. He didn't chase them. Anita had been sitting small on the bench, knees knocking their own rhythm. She slid off and came to his side without ceremony. Her arms went around his neck the way water finds a low place. "Can I call you Papa?" It wasn't a plea. It was a measure taken, a line drawn to see if it held. Jed didn't answer. He put his good hand to the center of her back and felt the small bones under his palm, felt her heart do the work it was meant for. He held, the way you hold a post upright while the earth decides to grip it. The house made that stove sound again, iron giving back what it had borrowed. On the counter, a telegraph slip lay under the glass paperweight Nettie had brought for coffee beans and never took back. The paper showed the crease where it had been folded hard, and the pencil marks of a message somebody had written faster than they could think it. Elena looked at it and then away, not ready to ask, not needing to. They ate what was left from earlier. Spoon to pot, a tap, then quiet. Anita's whistle lay on the table between them like a small tool that had proved its worth. Elena's hand found Jed's without show, just the backs of fingers fitting along the wood's grain, staying there as if they'd always done it. He didn't move his away. Afternoon leaned its shoulder into the wall. Outside, cottonwoods stitched shade where there hadn't been any. The wire on the pole spoke now and then, low, contented, as if trouble had taken a different road. A knock came, too quick, one patient. Miss Pritchard stood in the doorway with dust on her hem and satisfaction tucked into the corner of her mouth. She held another slip, this one fresh, edges crisp. "News," she said. "Marshall took Barranca down south near the gravel pits. Says your proof reads fine." She set the paper on the table, laid a finger on it. "Line's clear." Anita's fingers tightened at Jed's collar, then eased. Elena's breath went out, slow and honest. Jed looked from the slip to the child, to the woman, and back again. He didn't make big of it. He just gave a small nod a man gives when something heavy finally sets where it belongs. Miss Pritchard tipped an invisible hat and stepped back into the light. The door took her and left the room with the steady things. Wood, iron, 3 sets of breathing finding the same pace. The day held. The night. Come between them the house kept learning. Morning slid in clean and stayed. Hank set a planed pine board across 2 sawbucks on the porch, the grain bright and sticky with sap. He squared a chisel, tapped light, then sure. The letters came up a shaving at a time, curls falling to the plank like pale fish. EESPARANZEA. He spaced them with a carpenter's thumb, not a poet's, and that was better. Resin sweetened the air till even the stove smelled like a tree. Nettie brought stems gathered from the ditch, yarrow, a bit of rabbit brush, 1 blue thistle that meant to be noticed. "For the sill," she said, setting them in a jelly jar. She looked at the new letters and let her mouth try on a smile that fit. "Hope's a good fool to keep around." Reverend Eli read 2 lines, not more. He stood with his hat off, Bible closed under his palm like a table you lean on. "Do right where you stand," he said. "Keep at it." He nodded to the house as if it could hear, which maybe it could. Deputy Avery rode up later, courthouse dust still on his cuffs. He set a folded paper on Jed's table, the top line in a hand that didn't waste ink. "Writ's false," he said. "Marshall wired it from Socorro. Lines tight again. Miss Pritchard saw to that. Doyle and Quinn'll cool their heels till the judge makes the circuit." He didn't sit. He didn't need to. "You did fine." He tipped his brim and clinked back down the lane, the sound of his bit ticking like a polite clock. In the kitchen, Jed burned the eggs twice. Pan too hot, then not hot enough, then hot again. He scraped the curl of brown onto a plate and ate it like a man who knows better than to shame a meal. Elena leaned in the doorway, sleeves rolled, saying nothing. When he caught her watching, he offered the plate. She took a forkful, made a face that scolded nobody, and ate the rest anyway. Anita worked at the table with a coal nub from the stove bucket. She drew 3 hearts with lines that didn't keep to themselves, then added a crooked cottonwood and a horse with legs like nails. Soot smudged her fingers and her cheek. She licked her thumb. and pressed at a mistake till it became the shape she wanted. "There," she said, and tacked the paper to the wall by the stove with a dab of flour paste. Hank brought the sign when the letters were cut clean. Jed held one end while Hank set 2 screws into the porch beam. The board took its place like it had been measured for this span since the tree was sap. The wind came down the lane and ran its hand over the new word, Esperanza House. The clothesline ticked its small cotton sound. Somewhere far off, an anvil spoke 2 notes to say a thing was finished. Elena stepped out and stood under the sign. She didn't pull her sleeve down over the scar. She didn't pull her hair forward to hide the place a rope had argued with her neck. She let the light find what it found. Jed looked up at the letters, then at her, then at the little smudge of soot on Anita's face. He cleared his throat and missed it the first time. "Much obliged," he said, and it covered more ground than the yard. "For staying," he added, softer. Elena put her palm on the porch post, old paint under new shadow. "Home," she said. "Just that." Toward evening, the cottonwoods let go of some light they'd been keeping. The telegraph line out by the road sang a straight, easy note, nothing sneaky in it. Miss Pritchard passed with her wrench like a soldier who's late to nothing. Nettie's jar found the sill and stayed. Reverend Eli left his ribbon on a page and went on. Inside, the stove breathed, iron giving back what it had borrowed all day. The drawing of 3 hearts took the heat in its paper and trembled a little as if it had a pulse of its own. Jed set a hook over the door, a small thing Hank had bent from a horseshoe nail, and hung a lantern there. It swung once, twice, then settled to a glow that minded its manners. The house held the sound of forks, of a child's chair scooting, of water poured and not spilled. Outside, boards creaked the way good boards do when they're full and easy. The sign faced the lane, resin still bright, letters darkening as sap met air. Night came up from the wash, quiet and tall. The lantern kept its circle. The picture on the wall shook a little and then steadied like a chest, remembering the count. The lanterns steady, the wires sing straight. An Esperanza house holds 3 quiet hearts. If this one sat easy in your chest, like a stove finally breathing right, tell me so. Drop 0 if you believe a house can learn to breathe again. Drop 1 if the daybreak whistle stayed with you. Say little or much. Just leave a sign you rode this far. If you're new to this campfire, subscribe and ride along. Next up, more plain-spoken West. Work before words, small mercies that hold. Folks choosing right when no one's looking. I'll keep the coffee warm and the stories honest. Thanks for staying. Saddle's ready when you are.